holds a PhD and MA in economics from the University of Virginia and a BA in economics from University of South Florida. His research focuses on a wide range of topics from risky behavior and mental health areas with a special focus on suicide and substance abuse. Jose has over 20 peer-reviewed articles in well-respected journals. He has also appeared in over 100 local and regional national media interviews, including NPR Planet Money and The Indicator. He's a faculty scholar of the Commonwealth Institute of Kentucky, a member of the Statutory Committee Consensus Forecasting Group for the state of Kentucky, the former president of American Society of Hispanic Economists, member of the Committee of the Status of Minority Groups in the Economics Profession, and the chair of a university that I got my bachelor's from, the University of Louisville. Thank you for all you've done for that program. I really appreciate it. Please help me welcome Jose Fernandez to the stage. Thank you for being here.
We good? There we go. All right. Thank you for that introduction. It's a bit humbling to be in a room full of a bunch of people who I actually admire quite a bit. I follow a lot of you. I listen to a lot of your tips. And I come to you as a novice, so really look at this as someone who's just looking at what you do from a different lens and hopefully giving you some additional benefit from it. And so, there we go. So why am I here? Story time. I was approached to be chair of a department January 2020. March 2020, first week of March, I go ahead and sign the paperwork because we're about to have a conference on causal inference right there at Louisville that was going to start March 13th. Everyone knows what happened March 12th. So all of a sudden, you are massively pushed onto online teaching. All of this new stuff is coming your way. You have to relearn how you teach. How do you teach economics when you are no longer seeing the reaction of your students? You don't have that live feedback coming your way. And that was challenging because we're so used to standing up here and telling our stories, inspiring our students, trying to get them to bite in, see that light turn on. And that's hard to do when the screen is just a bunch of empty pictures, right? The other thing that happened to me during that time period is that I never really thought about everyone else's teaching. And I was just an instructor. That never came to mind. I only had to worry about my own classes, what I was doing. Once you get to see the full gamut of everything, you realize that your good teachers do such a great job that they not only recruit students, but they bring people in, they inspire folks. But then you have some teachers who need some improvement along the way, and these teachers can cause a very big negative externality on the rest of the department. And they do so in several ways that you probably don't see right away. For example, the good teachers actually end up teaching way more because there's many more students in their classrooms. They see all of the problems they unfortunately hear about the other instructors. That's an additional burden that comes along the way. So what do I do as a chair? Well, I got to help remedy this, right? I have to help tool people up. And so I go ahead and I start running and calling up my friends. I go, Darshak, Dula, what I do? What are the best practices? And then they start running off a litany of stuff. And I see this wave come at me, and I'm like, okay, that's too much. How do I deal with that? How do I deal with all of this? And that's where this idea of machine learning came in. Maybe I can use machine learning as a way to organize a lot of these things. And I'm going to talk about two types of machine learning today. Promise I'm only going to show you pictures, no nasty likelihood functions. The two that I'm going to talk about is sentimental analysis and topical modeling. And sentimental analysis is actually quite easy. It takes a sentence, and it looks for its tone. And from that tone, it tells you whether it's mainly positive or negative, thus turning it into a number, and we can use it for data analysis. Pretty cool, right? And And so I'll show you some sentimental analysis from student teaching evaluations, and you'll see how much you like it or not. And then the other is topic modeling. And topic modeling is this idea that any document that we write about, think of a paper you've written, it's a bag of words, and it's a bag of words that's trying to bring different ideas together. Well, if I can correlate those ideas across different papers, it's essentially identifying a hidden topic. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at these hidden topics. So here's an example of what a topic model would look like. Here is your paper. And you can see within the paper there are different colored words. And these words are correlated with one another, and they're correlated across different documents. And from those, you can actually create these hidden topics. And I'm going to do that or show that to you in 2 different papers. So what we did was we took a bunch of documents, basically went on to EconLit, downloaded a bunch of stuff, and then we put it into our algorithm. We told the algorithm, hey, I want this number of topics, and it then started churning out a list of words as well as some inference of a topic name. And those were used in order to give us some information about what do we study as economic educators. So before I get into that, I want to think about that classroom idea, right? What do we want our students to know? The question was brought up, is it time for a new economics curriculum? And you've seen this question pop up again and again and again and again. I mean, most recent version of it is probably Chetty saying we should just go straight empirical on everything, just show everything as an experiment. Well, what about if you ask the students what they want? What do students expect that economics should be teaching us? If you ask the students over in Great Britain, this is what they said. They said that we should be learning about inequality, poverty, environment. These are the types of things that they want to know about: sustainability, unemployment. Even here, on this side of the pond, you're seeing that they want these types of attachments that we're not necessarily providing in our common textbooks. So here's Leah. One of my favorite things to do on Twitter, or is it called X now, is I type in my econ prof in quotes and just let it go. All right? And this one came up and says, okay, my econ prof is killing it. She's dedicated an entire section of the class towards learning about the economics of poverty and discrimination. It's nice because she's a white prof and I'm the only black person in this class. We need to be able to bring up these ideas to identify with more students, who hopefully will be touching up on some of these things tomorrow. And so what do we actually teach them? That's where Samuel Bowles and Wendy Carlin came in. They went into our textbooks, and they used topic modeling within our textbooks to see not only what we're teaching, but how what we're teaching has changed over time. First thing they did was they looked to see, well, how are we displaying economics? You can see that the use of graphs has clearly gone up over time. This speaks to the mathiness that Paul Romer talked about, the increased mathiness that we have in our courses. We see a larger use of supply-demand, peaking when ManQ comes around, but still a lot more of these graphs are being used. This doesn't tell us anything, though, about topics, so they moved to topics next. And they started with Samuelson back in 1948. And you'll see that Samuelson's major topics, they were on institutions mainly. Right? They talked about the Federal Reserve, the gold standard, empirical studies about the industry, which really you should think of them as microcosms about how the government controlled the industry. They talked about banking institutions, World War I and World War II. When you look down at ManQ, though, ManQ flipped the script and said, well, let's walk away from institutions and let's talk about markets instead. And anyone who's taught out of ManQ, you can notice he starts almost every single chapter with a market. Right? So we've now moved away from these institutions and more towards what about advertising? What about incomplete information? What about game theory? These are the new ideas that were coming around when ManQ did it. Since then, you've seen some new textbooks pop up. Core in particular was one that is the newest one's freely available. And they've kind of doubled down on what ManQ's done. They introduced even more game theory. but they included behavioral economics to go in there as well. They expanded more on labor supply. They talked more about essentially the person. Right? They wanted to talk about inequality. They wanted to talk about democratic political competitions. We're becoming more empirical, and we're also talking more about the person, and we're walking further and further away from the institutions because the students want to see themselves in the book. That's what they want to see. Betsy Stevenson and Hannah Sotnick, they also wondered about language that was used in these textbooks. So not just the topics, but the language. And one of the things that I'm sure many of you have noticed in your classrooms is that a typical college campus is more female, and it's also becoming more diverse. Why aren't our textbooks reflecting that? Why aren't textbooks reflecting those ideas? If we look at the ratio of he to she, women only show up about 18% of the time in an economics textbook. And when they do show up the most, they show up as fictional characters. Right? Over 90% of the business people, policymakers, and economists are male in textbooks. Oops. We asked those same professors, what's the best way for students to learn? And they say, by example. That's the best way to learn. So let me ask you this. How are you going to identify with the subject matter that never uses you as an example? How's that going to happen? You don't see yourself in the text. You don't see yourself in the stories. How are you going to identify with it? It's hard. So we need to change. We need to be like Leah's professor, right? We need to introduce those ideas in there. So now that brings me back to my problem, right? I needed to get all of these ideas now flushed out somehow. And so I went and recruited 2 experts because I'm a little novice here. This is your world. I had to go and see these 2 experts. I'm just the data head. And I went over to Aaron Yetter and Kim Holder and asked them, what are best practices? And they kind of went, I don't know. There's all these things you could do, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly what best practices were. And go, okay, well then what do you guys mainly talk about when you talk about Econ Ed? And they said, well, it's all this stuff. And I'm like, well, what stuff? And the reason that we weren't able to communicate all that well was because of the way that we organize our thoughts in at least the social sciences. We use these JEL codes. You know what the JEL code is for Econ Ed? It's A2. And they don't give you topics. They give you levels. Right? These are your levels. General, pre-college, undergraduate, graduate, and other. If you were to add up all of the articles that exist in Econ Lit, only 0.5% of them fall in this category. Yet, it's over 50% of our jobs most of the time. You think about that. We spend all this time talking about other things besides the thing we almost do every day. So we acquired about 1,400 articles, and for each of these articles, we collected the author, the title, the abstract, the year, JEL code, and we got it primarily from these journals that do dedicate a large portion of their pages towards Econ Ed. And that includes ones that you know, the American Economist, AARP and Ps, the International Review of Economic Education, so on and so forth. From those articles, you can see that almost 80% fall in the undergraduate, that A22 category. And there are some that fall over in general and pre-college and graduate. But this is hiding a very large increase that has occurred over time. So if you look back in 1991 all the way up to 2015, the number of papers have tripled. Right? So since the early 1990s, we've seen this very large growth, or how my son likes to call it, the late 1900s. Right? We've seen this very large growth. And part of this large growth is not just an increase in that A22 category, but you can also see that there has been a larger increase among your pre-college. So there's this reaching of economics into not just the university setting, but also into your K through 12. When you separate out these articles among those journals that we had available, about 52% of them were in the Journal of Economic Education. And that's because they were the only game in town for quite a while. Now there's many, many more places. Hopefully JET will be on this list at some point in the future. But these were our only outlets that were available. And even within some of these outlets, those outlets are sometimes subsidized by other papers that have nothing to do with economy. So we got these 1,400 words, and now, so 1,400 papers, I'm sorry, and then we wanted to figure out, well, did we get the right papers? Do things make sense? And the first thing we do is quite simple. We just start counting up words. Start counting words, and what we find is, hopefully making sense to everyone else here, that economics is the most popular word used in econ ed papers, followed by student. So we're on our way, right? Student, teaching, learning. However, this doesn't tell us anything about topics, right? It's not quite useful. So then what we did was we said, well, maybe what we need to do is start looking at bigrams or two-word pairings. And that helps a little bit. We get that the most popular term is econ education, economic courses, student learning, teaching econ, student performance, and then principles of economics. So we're getting closer, but still it's not quite there. So then we use a trick that is used quite a lot whenever you do text analysis. We use what's called term frequency inverse document frequency weighting. That's a very fancy way of saying we want to find words that are used a lot in one particular document, but not used a lot across all documents. In other words, it's trying to identify the main idea of those documents. And when you do that, you start to see these topics emerge. The number one thing that we talk about are markets. Does that make sense? Followed by, at least the ones we may have problems with, macro, programs, finance, games, your major, price, college. Now this is informational, but it's still not quite there. This is where that topic modeling comes into play. Once we put it into our topic model, it ended up producing 19 different areas that we as econ educators actually concentrate on. And a good little trick here to use when you go through this, say, how do I teach? And then the name of the title. You can see it makes sense. How do I teach critical thinking? That's probably the biggest thing that we argue we do, right? We teach critical thinking, and that showed up number one. How do I teach the liberal arts? How do I teach with classroom technology? How do I teach market failure? How do I teach public choice? How do I teach asset pricing, game theory, education returns, micro theory, I/O, graduate school, fiscal and monetary policy, teaching online, demand and supply, gender issues, pedagogical practice, math and econ, economic growth, and then to round it out, financial literacy. We then took these topics and looked to see how they fall across those A2 categories. And what you find is, of course, A22 is almost covered completely with all these categories, but what do we teach the general public? And you can kind of use A20 and A29 for that. The general public's really interested in financial literacy. Super interested in financial literacy. They're super interested in gender issues and in apparently liberal arts, which I haven't figured out yet quite there. Graduate school, well, graduate school likes to talk about graduate school. They line up just fine. And when we look at our undergraduates, not our undergraduate, our pre-college, they mainly like to talk about critical thinking skills, gender issues in econ, and financial literacy. So once we got a taste for using these texts as data, it moved us over to another touchy area, right? And I was just talking with Hoove. I've been spending the weekend getting my packet together to go up for full, which means summarizing 15 years worth of teaching evaluations. If I look a little green, it's because, you do get, it's hard to read them after a while. It's hard to go through them. You sit there and you go like, is that really me? Is that really how people see me? It's hard to rate, but that's what we do. We looked at text in teaching evaluation. Specifically, we looked at Rate My Professor, and we'll get into the goods and bads of that. But why? Why look at course evaluations? Well, course evaluations are something that we use quite a lot. Whether good or bad, we use them a lot. We use them for Annual faculty evaluations, we use them for 5-year reviews, we use them for tenure promotion, we use them for hiring. Right? Other people do look you up, not just students. Other people look you up to see what they can find before they hire you. So it is something that is used. Now it is heavily biased, super biased. I don't know how many other ways we can show you that it's biased, right? It's biased by major, it's biased by course attributes, whether it's a required course or an elective, by level, whether it's a senior course versus a freshman course. It's biased by the age of the instructor, it's biased by the English as a second language of the person. It's definitely biased by attractiveness, so bad that my professor removed the chili pepper. That's how bad it was biased, right? It was biased by if you give treats right before you get your student evaluations. It's clearly biased by gender, and you'll see that again. It's biased by race and ethnicity. And yet we continue to use it, right? And we continue to use it, and anyone who's been to one of these workshops, you probably have all heard why. The comments are still valuable. We can use those comments. Those comments are worth it. What if I told you the comments are biased too? So the way we're going to show this is that we took 8 million reviews across all disciplines. Some of you might be in there. And using these, we identified about 710 unique instructors across over 4,000 institutions. We grabbed your name, the department you're in, your overall score, the review date, your institution, course name, course difficulty, but most importantly, we grabbed the student comments, because that's what we wanted to do. We want to find out, do the comments match the score? Is there actual value in those comments? From there, we had to find a way to identify gender and race. Gender was actually kind of easy. We just went through and looked for gendered words inside the text. And whenever we got a gendering that was greater than 90%, we assigned the gender there. Notice I had to give you that wiggle room. Yes, sometimes your students don't know what you look like. There was a great study done online where they just had unisex names, and the students still showed a bias when they thought it was a female instructor instead of a male instructor, even though it was a male instructor. It's that bad. For Professor Race, that one was harder. That one's the U.S. Census and Social Security do provide names and give you a probability of a race based off of the surname. And that's what we ended up using there. So now, what we did was we took the scores, and these are from the 5-star scores you can get, and we ranked them by department, by discipline, and we put down male and female. And you'll notice that for almost every department, the male score is larger than the female score. And yes, economics is close to the bottom of the 25. It's coming in here at 24. There's a few where it does flip. So mathematics, accounting, and chemistry all have women with higher scores relative to men, but those also are the ones with the smallest gaps, too. What about the sentimental scores? Well, now economics comes in all the way at the bottom. And here you see still that same type of pattern, right? You see the same type of pattern where more of the positive language is used for men than women. The other pattern you might be able to see is that the more math-based disciplines have lower scores than the more language-based disciplines. Chemistry is still there, hanging on, and so is accounting. And so in both those cases, you have women more than men, but everywhere else, it's following the pattern. So then we looked at race, and race still follows a pattern where white instructors seem to be getting higher scores than minoritized instructors. Here, the interesting part is that the more numerical disciplines, the gap actually gets larger rather than smaller. So a place where you would think things are more technical, there's only a right or wrong, right? We actually see an increase in those gaps. If there's any good news, the difference or the gaps become much more muted when you look at the comments, at least between races. And here you can see the one for econ almost disappears. Still down at the bottom, so they still don't like us. but it is one of the ones that has the smallest gap between them. Then from there, we went ahead and we took the sentimental scores. And we used those sentimental scores to compare them to all non-econ disciplines. We still separate up by male and female. What you find, and I know this is hard to see, remember, it's 8 million, so there are little tiny error bounds on top of those things. Everything's significant, just go with me there. Apparently, economists are more angrier, provide less anticipation, more disgust, more fear, less joy, more sadness, less surprise, less trust, more negative terms, and less positive terms. So basically, we fulfill the dismal science according to these comments. If you look at it by gender, even both econ and across, you'll still notice that for the positive terms, they are more male-dominated, and for the negative terms, they are more female-dominated. And you can see this in other words. Like maybe you might say, oh, I'm just like picking out little things, or I have some type of aggregation bias. So let's look at specific words. Let's look at the word professor. When you look at the word professor, there's a gap. There's still a gap. Right? It's much more likely that a male instructor will be called a professor than a female instructor. What about if we change it to teacher? You notice the difference? Right? Women are going to be much more likely to be called the teacher instead of men. Same data set. It's not like I pulled a whole new set of schools. Same data set. How about strict? If you look at this, women are much more likely to be called strict. Apparently, again, in the languages or in music, much more likely to be called strict relative to men. Econ down there near the bottom. How about brilliant? Apparently, philosophers are super brilliant. But there you still see that male to female pattern. Econ here sitting in the middle. How about annoying? Right? Women are much more likely to be called annoying, and here, unfortunately, econ is near the top. And so we have this issue with that's present in econ that we know already from a diversity problem from the instructor side. And now it's clearly spilling over into the student side. But I'm going to give you some hope. Right? And here's my hope. Leah clearly had an instructor who was willing to do that. And you all are spending your weekend out here trying to do the same. So I have lots of hope. And many of you teach what I consider to be the most important class in all of economics, and that's principles economics. And let me explain why. Only about 45% of college students take one econ class, and I think that's kind of high. I think it's kind of generous, but 45%. Of those students, only 3% become majors. You do the math quickly in your head, about 1.7% of any college student will become an econ major. That means for the grand majority of students, you are their first and their last econ class. That's the impression that they're going to have. So you have an important, extremely important, pivotal role. It brings me back to the beginning. What do you want them to know when they leave your classroom? Because you're going to be all their econ education they're ever going to have. What do you want them to know? That's something I hope that you plug into this weekend, that you use this group here to really geek out on it, right? Really recharge on this idea of teaching econ, and that you can leave here fulfilled to try to send out that message, because it really is on you. By the time they get to me in the upper levels, they've selected so far, right? I'm already looking at that 1.7% at that point. Those were ride or die people. They were going to go through anyway. But if I could get that number just to budge up a little bit, oh, my problems would be good. They would go away so quickly. Right? That's where it's going to go. Now I'm going to give you just a little bit of help here before I leave, because I'm giving you a lot of bad news. Right? I'll give you some good news. I'm sure you've heard of this thing called ChatGPT by now. ChatGPT is smarter than your principal students. Adrian can talk to that a little bit. It is smarter. It's apparently smarter than a lot of students. ChatGPT 4 has passed the MCAT, has passed all of the USML steps. At least I've passed Series 7, so we can trade stocks. Right? It's passed many of our licensure tests that are out there. But I still think that you should use it. And there's lots of ways that you should use it to make your life easier. So one of the ways that you could use is to write exit tickets. Right? If those of you use exit tickets on your way out, it might be tough to come up with one all the time. It takes you seconds to just ask it to say, hey, I'm teaching this lesson on market entry. Can you give me 2 quick questions on that? And you can feed it in there. It can help you write questions. It can help you write iClicker questions. It can be a personal tutor, and we're definitely going to get there. Someone's going to come up with a bot by next year, I'm sure, that will do exactly that. It can help you write recommendation letters, and I'll get to that a little bit. It'll help you write better emails, and I'll show you an example of that. And it'll help you summarize teaching evaluations. All right. One of our great stars here wrote this up, and I almost used it last night when I was reading through them. If you don't want to read those negative comments, but you still want to get that valuable feedback, copy and paste all those comments into ChatGPT and ask, give me the top 5 points that come through there. It takes all the sting out and gives you all of the results that you wanted anyway. It's much more informative, right? Makes you feel good at the end, and you get what you want out of it. That's an easy use of it. It's a nice way to desensitize a lot of these comments. Writing emails. As a department chair, there are lots of emails that I would love to write that I should not write. All right? So I'll give you an example. Dear faculty member, will you please just do your job and stop complaining so much? I need those reports last week. Please get them to me by the end of the week, if not sooner. Thank you, Jose. There's this great little plugin in Google called Monica, and Monica will let you choose the length of your email or blog post, the tone, would you like it professional? It can even change the language for you. And this is what Monica did with my email here. Dear faculty member, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to kindly request the report that were due last week. As you know, timely submission of reports is crucial for the smooth functioning of our organization. I understand that you may have other commitments, but I would appreciate it if you could prioritize the submission of these reports. If you're able to submit them earlier, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your attention to this matter. If you have any concerns or questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Much better. So I could write the email that I wanted to write and have an AI make it nice and pretty for me. Right? Recommendation letters. So this is a trick that I've now used a couple of times. You prompt it to say you want them to write you a recommendation letter. You tell the student's name. You tell what they're applying for. You tell the student that they took a certain class from you, because otherwise you shouldn't be writing one, right? And then you let them know when they're ready to receive the resume of the student. It will say, I'm ready. I go ahead and I copy and paste the entire resume into there. It then writes one, and then I ask it to add these little quick notes that I know about the student. Say they wrote a paper for you in your class, or they did some extra project outside of class, or you're part of the econ club, what have you, right? You put that in there. And then you can edit it. And some people say, yeah, but how good is it? How good does it work, right? So there is Anna Hyden over in the top right-hand corner. At U of L, we have the tradition of nominating students to be flag bearers for the different colleges, and these are the outstanding students. And then from those students, the commencement speaker is chosen. I used ChatGPT to write Anna's recommendation letter, and there she is giving the commencement speech this past spring. Right? And I was told later on that it was selected just because of that reference letter. It works. It fools deans. Right? It totally works. So we should be thinking about how to bring AI into our classrooms. We should be also thinking about how we can use AI to be our TA. Right? Use it to be more productive for yourself. Use it to be more productive in other parts of your life. We're going to continue to be seeing this thing coming at us over and over and over again. Here's Susan Athey. She's the president of the AEA. She writes, economic education will take on an important role in educating students in how to use data to answer questions. Given the unique advantages economics as a discipline has, as these methods and approaches, many of the newly created data science undergraduate and graduate programs will bring in economists and other social scientists, creating an increased demand for teaching from an empirical economist and applied econometrician standpoint. And so, we're getting the call. The call is there. You guys are the front line, and maybe the only line. And so I hope that you can use this weekend to go forward, to recharge, to think about how you can use AI to benefit your classroom and benefit your own life. And I hope you got something out of this talk along the way. Hopefully I haven't held you hungry too much longer. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and contact me. These are sessions I'm looking forward to, things starting tomorrow. Picture is worth 1,000 words, infographic assignments in economics. That's a nice, easy way to introduce the idea of data science. Econ Games, I've been a fan from afar. In Econ Games, it's a wonderful program. It's something that we probably should do more. We could even do it in much smaller sessions from institution to institution. And then empowering educators and engaging students with AI, something that you should check out. Hope you enjoyed the talk. And looking forward to meeting everyone throughout the weekend. Yeah, happy to take questions. You can ask ChatGPT.
Since we have some time, anybody have some questions? All right, 1 second. Chris?
So I loved all the descriptive statistics there. But by any chance, could you opine, if you don't have the research, on any way to fix that or address those issues, the biases you saw in the results?
To deal with some of the ways that we can deal with the issues of biases is, one, to tell students that they exist. Right? I think in many cases, they don't know they exist, so there's a lot of this cognitive dissonance that's occurring when they're filling out these forms. So being forthright that these things exist puts it in their mind when they fill out those forms. Now, you don't want to push that envelope too much, right? But I really don't think that a lot of students know that, and they are unfortunately just going on whatever they've been programmed to kind of do when they fill out those teaching evaluations.
Great, we have another question back here.
Hi, Jose. Thank you so much. I thought that was so interesting. I have a question. I mean, I think the most powerful resource for our students is examples. And sorry, Abdullah, but one of the examples that I often use in my class is Oman, because Abdullah is from Oman, and that brings in connections for me. And so what I've started doing, actually, Amy, based on one of your talks, was trying to figure out who is my student population. And for me, last semester, I had students from, I think it was 8 different countries, and bringing those into my notes. I actually edited my notes, and this, Amy, this was entirely based on your talk, to bring in the different currencies from the countries that they were from. I'm just curious if there's anything in your research or that people have thought about to try to quantify the impact of that. I know anecdotally from Amy and from myself that it has been impactful, but I'm just curious if you've heard of anything like that.
I haven't heard of that directly, and now that you mention it, we have a fairly large international population teaching economics. I don't know to what extent they themselves even use it in their own classroom. Because like one of the examples I give, I'm half Cuban, and I remember vividly when I was a little kid taking my uncle who was visiting via visa to a supermarket for the first time. And it always stays in my mind because like we had to go and run in and get something, I forget what it was. Walked in and I'm pulling him along and he just stops. And I'm like, we have to go get the thing. And he was just mesmerized by all of the products that were on all the shelves. And he just stops and he starts asking all these questions like, are these always here? Does it always look this way? And students don't realize that. Like they don't realize that shock that's there. There's a couple on TikTok that now do the same thing, and the guy just arrived, so now everything's new to him. And she just TikToks him throughout, and now they repeat it again. The absolute shock of being able to see that. Or recently with the hyperinflation, and you saw the shelves in Venezuela all emptied out, right? They need to see that. They need to see that that's real. It's not just a textbook story. Real people are experiencing it. That's where the appreciation comes from. Because for everything else, it's on the margin. For these people, they're on the extent, right? They're feeling it. And so I think bringing that to light is quite important.
Perfect. Emily, you could always use Oman as an example. If you need more content, please follow my YouTube channel. Anybody else with a question? Yes.
I was just wondering if you've ever looked at advanced placement score data, male versus female results. I just retired from teaching a couple of years ago, and when I was teaching AP, we had the wall of fives, and it was all boys up there for a while, and it was so important for me having a couple of daughters. Like, I want our female students to be represented up there as well. And when we had that first one, it was a big celebration, it was a big deal, right? And then I think by the time I left, it was fairly equal as far as the scores, but it just got me thinking with what you've been addressing is that data even available to research? Have you seen anything about that?
So I don't know about that for AP. What I can tell you is that Claudia Golden has run some experiments with just grades. And what they find is that at least female college students are much more elastic when it comes to grades. And so what I mean by that is if I were to award, no, that's not true. If the student were to earn an A- in my class and they were female, they may not actually end up majoring. Because they might be like, oh, I could have gone better, I could have gone A, I wasn't good enough. If I give a male student a B+ or a C, they're just fine. They've already decided. So at least what we've seen in the data is that men are much more inelastic to grades when choosing econ than women are. So what can we do? One of those things we can do is we can inform that an A- is not a bad grade, right? Like I don't think we do enough of that. But we have to also provide them with what are the things that they could do with an econ grade. Look beyond the grade. What else is there they could do with the degree? Right? And they're putting too much value on this numerical thing that no one's going to ever ask them about when they graduate. A lot of value on that. And they're not thinking enough about, do they value the subject matter? And that's kind of on us, right? That means we just got them in there to put a bunch of information in front of them, weigh them, and then send them off. We didn't make a connection. And so we have to make that connection, and part of it is they have to see themselves in the literature. Like one of the things that some of the researchers have found is that just simply talking about behavioral economics in principles courses, identify much more with women than with men. Just talking about it, saying that we can be wrong. Just that alone will help identify more. But we don't typically do that, right? We typically teach Econo Man, who's purely rational, knows everything, and always makes the right decisions. By showing that econ can make mistakes, it makes it more humanistic.
We have another question here.
In light of the expected increase in students' use of artificial intelligence to produce classroom output, how do you recommend, or how do you see as educators adjust our way of evaluating that output before and after this use? So, I mean, like somebody draws a graph, handmade, there's a lot of effort, maybe some mistakes, maybe the lines are not straight, versus using a computer-generated graph and that is perfect. But then, was there more learning with the computer than it is using your hands? How do we deal with that?
So this is going to be a moving target as AI improves. So I'll give you my answer today, but it'll change as it gets better. Right now, it could actually be a blessing in disguise. And let me explain why. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but post-COVID, my attendance has not been what it used to be, all right? You're not getting that same level of engagement that you used to have. Paper and pencil exams can fix a lot of that. That brings the student back into the classroom. So that's one place, right? Second thing is that at least ChatGPT 3.5 doesn't know anything about the world after 2021. So just ask it new stuff, right? Just, if you really believe econ is everywhere, that should not be hard. That should not be hard. Third thing is do what you already currently do as an instructor. Help them find econ in other places. Right? That gets around the definitional stuff that ChatGPT is going to be very good at and gets back into this synthesis stuff that we want them to know, the critical thinking skills that we want them to know. Yes, unfortunately, we're going to go down this road where things are going to become harder. It's only going to become harder because the informational points of it are just going to be a waste of time to ask. Just like we made the argument that these little computers that we hold in our pockets now have a lot of information that we no longer have to memorize. These AIs are going to do the same thing. Those little factoids, we're not going to care about those anymore. What we're going to care about is, can you put these things together? Can you make a synthesis? Can you go out there and say, why do those two things matter? Or why does that market exist? Can you come up with those rationales? Those are going to be the types of questions that we're going to ask, and that's something that ChatGPT is not going to be able to do. Not yet, but we're not going to be able to do. So those are the things that you'll have to deal with. There is some constraints, right? So if they can afford ChatGPT 4.0 that is connected to the internet, that comes with that additional information, but also comes with the additional bias. We've all seen the internet. Do you want to be remembered in this world by what the internet says you look like? Or the way your family says you look like, right? And so those are going to come with other problems, but I don't think we're there yet. I think that's another year down the road. Next year, we'll have to worry about that. I still think synthesis is the answer, though.
So, sorry, oh, so loud. I'm bad with microphones, sorry. You mentioned that most students will never take another econ class again after your class. What are the 3 things that you want your students who will never take another econ class again to leave knowing?
Okay. I can think 2 of them right away. One of the things I love about economics, and whenever you debate with anyone else, you probably feel yourself doing this, is that there are costs and benefits to everything. And because there are costs and benefits to everything, you can argue both sides, and what we're really just arguing about are the magnitudes on both sides. Getting people to think that way, that there's always a cost and a benefit, and that we're not really saying someone's right or wrong. What we're saying is how big is the cost versus how big is the benefit. Let's have that discussion rather than saying blankly something's right and something's wrong. So that's number one. Number two, we live in a strategic world. We live in a strategic world. That every action, every strategic action you make is because of someone else's action, someone else's reaction. I want them to be able to think that way. Right? Third one's harder, but it's this idea of the kind of an efficient market. Like, why do these things exist? We see things all the time that we're just like, who would buy that? Clearly someone is willing to buy it. Having them think through that problem and be unafraid about it. So like one of the things that I love hearing is when you go to like a sports econ talk and you find someone who's never played the game come up with the idea. And they're looking at the problem with a complete set of fresh eyes. They don't know what no means. They don't know what a stupid answer is or stupid question is. And because of that, they come to a conclusion that we would have written off long ago. Being unafraid is something that I wish more students had in them. If you look at good entrepreneurs, so like a great assignment, if you don't do this assignment, you should. Have them interview entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs that never went to college. Because they end up learning the hard way all the things we teach them in class. They say it a little bit differently, but they end up learning the hard way. The beauty of listening to these entrepreneurs is that they go through the exercise of marginal cost and marginal benefit. They go through that exercise of fixed costs. They go through that exercise of going through all those things. But the biggest thing is they were unafraid to start. And too many people say, oh, that's too hard, and stop. And I wish our students were more unafraid and willing to put themselves out there instead of being risk averse and just looking for the next sure thing.
Maybe a fourth would be you should take a second class of economics.
Can you give Jose another round of applause, please? Thank you. Appreciate it.